The floor down there smelled like old stone, and something older than that. Reed had a theory that the lower corridors of the Goldspire creche had been breathing the same sealed air for 200 years. Nobody came this deep anymore. The wardens ran their nursery from the upper levels where the eggs sat in rows of warm amber light, and the air was clean and controlled. Down here was just pipes, old rock, and the faint hum of systems that had been running so long they had forgotten they were running. Reed liked it. He had worked at the creche for 7 years, and the deep levels were the only place in the whole facility where he felt like he was actually alone. Everywhere else there was the weight of being watched, not in a cruel way. The dragons did not watch him with suspicion exactly. They watched him the way a person watches a piece of furniture that has learned to carry its own boxes. Useful, not worth a full conversation. He was rerouting a coolant line on the eastern wall of sublevel 4 when the panel moved. He had not touched it deliberately. His shoulder caught the edge while he was reaching past it, and the entire section of wall shifted inward with a low scrape of stone on stone. Reed pulled back, stood still, listened. Nothing above him changed. No alarm, no sound of heavy wing beats on the upper levels. He pushed the panel the rest of the way open. The chamber inside was small, maybe 5 steps across. The walls were the same ancient stone as the corridor, but carved differently, smoothed in deliberate curves, not cut for function, but shaped with care. In the center of the room, held inside a thin column of pale blue light, was an egg. Reed did not move for a while. He had seen hundreds of dragon eggs in 7 years. They came in deep reds and warm greens, and the occasional brilliant white that the elder wardens treated with particular reverence. This one was none of those colors. It was silver blue, the shade of ice over deep water, and its surface was covered in patterns that did not look like anything he had seen on an egg before. They were not cracks. They were not damage. They were lines, thin and precise, running across the shell in shapes that almost made sense if he looked at them from the right angle. He stood there for 4 minutes by his work timer. Then he stepped back, put his shoulder to the panel, and pushed it closed. He finished the coolant line. He filed his maintenance report. He did not write one word about the chamber. He came back the next day, and the day after. On the 3rd visit, he brought his environmental scanner, a small handheld thing he used to check air quality in sealed spaces. He ran it over the blue column of light from as close as he dared and looked at the numbers. The column was a stasis field, old design, not current Conclave standard, and it was not holding at full strength. It was at 61% of baseline. He did not know what it had been at when it was first activated, but 61% felt like a number with a direction, and the direction was down. He sat on the stone floor of that small room with his back to the wall and looked at the egg for a long time. He was not a scientist. He was not a soldier or a diplomat or anyone who had any particular standing in the Conclave's world. He was a maintenance technician. His job was to find things that were failing quietly and stop them from failing loudly. That was all. That was the whole job. The stasis field was failing quietly. He closed his scanner and put it back in his belt pouch and sat there a little longer. On the way out through the corridor, he passed the secondary monitoring node for sublevel 4 and checked the log out of habit. The last active scan of this section was dated 19 years and 8 months ago. Whatever was in that room had not been checked on in nearly 2 decades. Either everyone had forgotten it was there, or everyone had decided not to remember. Neither answer felt good. Reed climbed the maintenance ladder back to the upper levels and walked out into the wide, warm air of the nursery floor. 2 wardens were moving between the egg rows on the far side, big shapes, red-scaled and deliberate, talking in low rumbles he could not make out from this distance. He watched them for a moment. Then he picked up his toolkit and went to his next scheduled job. But he was already thinking about the scanner numbers, 61% and falling. Someone had put that egg down there and locked it behind a door that opened with a human hand. He did not know what that meant yet. He only knew that he had 3 more visits before he would have to decide whether to tell someone or do something about it himself. He was almost certain those were not the same thing. There are two ways to research something you are not supposed to know about. The first is to ask. The second is to already be the person who fixes things, which means people hand you documents without thinking about it because you need the building layout, the system schematics, the maintenance history, and nobody considers those things secrets until someone inconvenient starts reading them carefully. Reed was very good at reading carefully. The Human Operations Library at the creche perimeter was not much, 3 shelves of physical documents and a shared terminal that ran slow. But the Conclave had required all facility infrastructure to be logged in both Dragon script and Standard for the past 30 years, which meant Reed had access to every maintenance record going back 3 decades. He pulled Sublevel 4's full history over 2 evenings and read it in his quarters with the door shut. The chamber did not appear in any record after a single entry dated 20 years and 2 months ago. The entry was short. It listed the installation of a stasis unit, the transfer of 1 biological specimen to holding, and a note that access to the chamber was restricted by Warden authority. The technician who filed it had signed with a worker number, not a name. The approving warden's name was listed as Sorath. Reed sat with that for a moment. Warden Sorath was the senior warden of the creche. She was ancient by any standard, red-scaled and deliberate in everything she did. She had spoken to Reed exactly 4 times in 7 years, each time about something practical. She was not unkind. She was the kind of authority that did not need to be unkind because its weight was simply always present. He kept reading. At the bottom of the entry, nearly cut off by the page margin, was a reference number that led nowhere, a document ID with no linked file. But the prefix on the reference number matched a format Reed had seen once before, in a supply exchange manifest he had filed 2 years ago. That manifest had come through a logistics contact named Drev. An old dragon, retired, who moved between Conclave facilities doing what he called consultancy work, and what seemed to Reed more like wandering with purpose. Reed found the name in 3 other documents once he knew to look. Drev had signed off on the stasis unit installation. Drev had certified the chamber's structural integrity. Drev, it seemed, had built the door. Reed sent a short message to the logistics channel Drev had used 2 years ago. He kept it simple. He was the maintenance tech at Goldspire Creche. He had found a reference number in an old document. He was trying to close out a maintenance log. Could Drev help clarify? He did not expect a fast reply. He got one in 6 hours. The message from Drev said only, "Which corridor, what level?" Reed wrote back, "Sublevel 4, Eastern Wall." Drev's response came in 3 minutes. "Then patience has finally run out. I will come when I can. Do not touch the field controls. Do not report this yet." Reed read that 3 times. Then he went back down to Sublevel 4 with his scanner. 58%. He ran the numbers. At this rate of decay, the field would fail completely in somewhere between 3 and 5 weeks. He did not know exactly what happened to an egg in stasis when the field failed, whether it died immediately or degraded slowly, but he knew enough about biological stasis in general to know that an unmanaged field collapse was not something a living thing survived well. 3 to 5 weeks. Drev said he would come when he could. That was not a guarantee. On his way back up, Reed passed Warden Drev in the corridor junction at Sublevel 2. Drev was the second warden, deep green scales, taller than Sorath, with a way of filling a corridor that made the corridor feel smaller. He looked at Reed the way he always looked at Reed, which was with the particular expression of someone who has accepted the presence of something they did not vote for. "Your authorization does not extend past Corridor 7 on this level," Drev said. His standard was precise and flat. "I know," Reed said. "I was in Corridor 4, just heading up." Drev said nothing else. He watched Reed walk to the ladder and climb. Reed did not look back, but he felt the weight of being watched all the way up. That evening, Director Issel called on the operations channel for a routine check-in. She asked how the facility was running, whether Reed had any maintenance flags to report, whether relations with the warden staff were stable. Reed said everything was fine, Systems running within normal range. No flags. He did not mention the chamber. He did not mention the egg. He did not mention Drev or Torev or the number 58. After the call ended, he sat quietly for a while. He had never lied to Issel by omission before. It felt different than he expected, not clean, not dirty, just heavy. Like carrying something that did not belong to him, but that he had picked up anyway because there was no one else close enough. Outside his window, the creche rose against the dark of Varastun's sky, massive and old, and lit from within by the warm amber glow of the nursery levels. Somewhere down in the dark below that warmth, an egg was losing the light that kept it safe. Reed pulled up his scanner data again and started calculating more carefully. He needed a better estimate. He needed to know exactly how much time he had before waiting was no longer an option. 3 weeks, maybe less. He closed the file and went to sleep, which was harder than usual. Torev did not come in 2 days. He did not come in 5. On the 8th day, Reed's scanner read 44%. He stood in the chamber alone and did the only thing he could think of. He opened his maintenance kit and started looking at the stasis column's base housing. He was not an egg specialist. He was not a biologist. He was a man who had spent 7 years fixing things in a building full of biology, which meant he understood, in a practical way, how the support systems worked even if he did not understand what they were supporting. The stasis field ran on a resonance emitter, a type Reed recognized because the creche used a newer version of the same basic design in the primary nursery. The old unit down here was losing output because 2 of its 4 emitter nodes had degraded. They were not broken, they were old. The crystal elements inside them had simply dimmed with time. Reed had 3 replacement nodes in his supply kit. They were for a different unit, newer model, but the crystal format was compatible. He had checked twice. He was almost certain. He replaced the nodes. He recalibrated the output manually using the field strength reader on his scanner as a guide. It took 2 hours and he got it wrong the first time and had to start over. The second time it held. He watched the field percentage climb, 44, 50, 59. It stabilized at 63 and stopped climbing, which meant the 3rd and 4th nodes were also degraded but more slowly. He had bought time, not a solution, time. He sat back against the wall and breathed. Then he went upstairs and knocked on Warden Sorath's office door. She opened it herself, which surprised him. She looked down at him from the doorway. She was very large up close, the red of her scales deep as old brick, and said nothing, which was an invitation to speak if he had ever heard one. "I need to tell you something," Reed said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you decide what to do about it." She let him in. He told her everything. The panel, the chamber, the egg, the scanner readings, the maintenance records with her name on them, his message to Torev. He told her about replacing the nodes. He put his scanner on her desk and showed her the current reading and his log of the decline. He did not minimize anything or try to explain why he had not reported it sooner. He just told her what he had done and in what order. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Did you read the shell patterns?" she said at last. Reed blinked. "I didn't know they could be read." She turned to the window. The nursery floor spread below them, warm and amber, rows of eggs in their cradles. "Every dragon egg carries a record on its shell," she said. "Lineage, development, biological markers. The patterns tell us what the egg is, where it comes from, what the hatchling may become." She paused. "The egg you found has patterns that do not appear in any Conclave record, not any record that exists now. Not any record that has ever existed, as far as I could determine 20 years ago." "That's why you sealed it," Reed said. "That is why the decision was made to seal it," she said, which was not quite the same thing, and Reed noticed the difference. "The Conclave does not know what to do with things it cannot place. It contains them. It waits. It hopes the question resolves itself." "The question nearly resolved itself permanently," Reed said. "The field was at 44%. Sorath was quiet again. Then she said, "You repaired it." "Temporarily, the other 2 nodes will go. I estimate a few weeks, maybe a month if we're lucky." She turned back from the window and looked at him directly. He had her full attention in a way he had never had it before, and it was a substantial thing to have. "What do you want from me?" she said. "I want to move the egg to a proper incubation alcove, one of the secondary ones on level 2 that isn't in the main nursery log. I want to do it quietly, and I want your help, and I want to do it before Warden Drev's quarterly audit in 9 days." The silence after that was long enough that Reed started planning what he would say to Director Issel. Then Sorath said, "Drev's audit has been moved. He told me this morning. He is starting in 7 days now, not 9. "Oh," Reed said. "We will need to move tonight," Sorath said, "after the 3rd watch rotation." Reed looked at her. She was already moving toward a cabinet on the far wall, pulling out a set of incubation transfer tools with the calm efficiency of someone who had been making difficult decisions for longer than Reed's entire species had been in space. "I want to be clear," she said without turning around. "If this is discovered before we can establish a defensible position, I will tell the truth about your involvement and mine. I will not lie to the Conclave." "I'm not asking you to," Reed said. "Good." She set the tools on the desk between them. "Then let us discuss the route." They worked until nearly midnight, planning. Reed left her office with a map in his head and a cold, clear feeling in his chest. Not fear exactly. Something more like the moment before you correct a serious error in a system that has been running wrong for a long time. A kind of readiness. 7 days. He could do a great deal in 7 days. They moved the egg on a night when Varath Dun's smaller moons sat behind the rock shelf west of the creche, and the outer corridors were as dark as they ever got. Reed carried the portable transfer cradle. Sorath carried the egg. She held it with both forelimbs close to her chest, carefully, the way Reed had seen the wardens carry the most fragile of the primary nursery eggs. She did not speak the whole way up through the service corridor and into the secondary incubation wing on level 2. The alcove she had chosen was at the far end of a row that had not been used in 6 years. It had its own environment controls and its own log, separate from the main nursery system, with access limited to warden-level authentication. She set the egg in the cradle. Reed connected the incubation links. They ran a calibration together, Reed reading the numbers aloud and Sorath adjusting the heat flow by hand. When the system settled into green across all readings, they both stood back and looked at it. The egg's surface patterns had brightened slightly since Reed had replaced the nodes. The lines on the shell were more visible now, silver-white against the blue, catching the alcove's warm light in ways that shifted when Reed moved his head. He still could not tell what they meant, but they were there, and they were active, and that felt like something. "Sleep," Sorath told him, and left. Reed did not sleep well. He lay in his quarters on sublevel 1 and listened to the building around him and thought about the audit in 6 days. He did not need to worry about the audit in 6 days because the egg hatched on day 4. He was alone. He had come in early before his shift to run a routine check on the alcove's heat distribution, which had been uneven overnight. He was crouched at the base of the cradle with a calibration tool when he heard it, a sound he had never heard before, soft and precise, like something tapping from inside stone to find out if the stone was still there. He stood up slowly. The surface of the egg was moving. The patterns on the shell were pulsing now, bright and fast. And there were small fracture lines spreading out from the center of the broadest pattern, not cracks from damage, but the deliberate lines of something choosing to open. Reed stepped back and stood against the far wall with his hands at his sides, because he did not know what else to do, and he understood instinctively that this was not a moment to interfere. It took 11 minutes. Later he would think that was a strange thing to know, that he had counted without meaning to. The shell came apart in 4 large sections and 1 small one, and from inside it, in the warm light of the alcove, came something that looked at him immediately. The hatchling was small, much smaller than the primary nursery hatchlings Reed had glimpsed from doorways. Silver-blue scaled, lighter on the underside, with wings folded tight to its back like it had not yet decided to trust them. Its eyes were pale amber, and they were already tracking, already focusing. It looked at Reed with an attention that was not the blank animal attention of something newborn. It was the attention of something that was trying to work out what it was looking at. Reed did not move. The hatchling tilted its head. Then it stepped carefully out of the broken shell, walked across the cradle on legs that were unsteady but not afraid, and pushed its nose gently against Reed's hand. Reed exhaled. He knew enough about dragon hatchlings from 7 years of proximity, not expert knowledge, just accumulated observation, to understand that first contact mattered. A hatchling bonded to the first presence it recognized as safe. He had not planned this. He had not wanted to be here alone for this. But he was here, and the hatchling had already made its choice, which was apparently Reed, which was the kind of decision Reed was not sure the Conclave was going to accept calmly. He sent Sorath a one-word message on the maintenance channel they shared. Now. While he waited, he sat carefully on the floor so he would be less tall, and the hatchling climbed onto his knee and sat there and looked at the room with the same serious attention it had aimed at Reed. Reed looked at it. He had 7 years of professional distance from the dragons of the creche, and in about 4 minutes, that distance had become a different kind of thing entirely. Sorath arrived in less than 10 minutes. She came through the alcove door and stopped. She looked at the hatchling looked at her, then it looked back at Reed as if confirming something. Sorath's expression was one Reed could not read, which was unusual because he had gotten reasonably good at reading her over the past days. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she crossed to the cradle and leaned down close to the broken shell and studied the inside of it for a while, reading the interior pattern marks the way you would read a page. "He has no parallel in our records," she said at last. "He," Reed said, knotting the word. "He," she confirmed. She straightened and looked at the hatchling again, and this time Reed thought he saw something in her face that was not institutional at all, something older and quieter than that. "I have seen interior shell records for 40,000 eggs," she said. "I have never seen this particular notation." "What notation?" She was quiet another moment. Then, the word our oldest scholars used, in a script so old most wardens cannot read it. The word is something like convergence. She looked at Reed. "I need to contact Drev." "When?" Reed said. "Immediately." She was already moving toward the door, then she stopped. "The audit," she said. "Drev begins in 2 days. I pushed it back by sending him a false preparation request. He will not accept a second one." Reed looked down at the hatchling on his knee. The hatchling was looking at the broken shell with what appeared to be academic interest. 2 days, Reed said. 2 days, Sorath agreed, and left. Reed sat on the floor of the alcove with a hatchling on his knee and 2 days to figure out what came next. The hatchling made a small sound, not distress, not a call, just sound, the way a person might make a sound when they are thinking. It was such a specific, deliberate little noise that Reed felt something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with strategy or timelines. "Okay," he said quietly, to no one in particular. "Okay." Drev found them on the morning of the second day. He had not been looking for the alcove specifically. His audit sweep flagged an anomalous heat reading in the secondary incubation wing, a section not listed as active in the current nursery log, and he followed it the way a careful authority always follows the thing that does not match the record. He came through the alcove door without announcement and stood in the entrance with his wings slightly open, which in dragon body language Reed had learned meant alertness shading toward aggression. He looked at Reed. He looked at the hatchling, who was asleep in the cradle. He looked at Sorath, who had returned an hour ago and was standing on the other side of the cradle. "Explain this," Drev said. Sorath explained. She was precise and unhurried. She told Drev about the vault, the egg, the degrading stasis field, Reed's repair, the transfer, the hatching. She did not apologize. She did not minimize. Reed stood against the wall and said nothing because nothing he said was going to help here, and he knew it. Drev listened without speaking. When Sorath finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You hid this from a warden audit. You used an unauthorized alcove. You allowed a human worker unsupervised access to a biological specimen of unknown classification." "Yes," Sorath said. "And you consider this defensible?" "I consider it necessary," she said. The field was failing. The egg would have died. The egg was sealed by Conclave authority. The egg was sealed and forgotten, Sorath said. There is a difference. The hatchling woke up at that point, sat up in the cradle, and looked at Drev with the same careful attention it gave everything. Drev looked back at it. Something passed across his face that was not quite what Reed expected, not anger, not contempt. More like the expression of someone who has walked into a room that is arranged differently than they remembered and cannot immediately decide what that means. Then Drev called an emergency conclave session, which was his right, and that was when things became formal. Reed was moved to the human quarters at the facility perimeter, not roughly, not under guard, but moved, escorted by a junior warden who was professional and said almost nothing. The hatchling was placed back in the alcove under conclave custody. Reed had time to catch the hatchling's eyes before the door closed. The hatchling watched him go with an expression that Reed would spend a long time thinking about afterward. The conclave session lasted most of the day. Reed sat in his quarters and read and thought, and did not panic, which he considered one of his better qualities. In the early evening, Director Issel arrived in person. She knocked on his door and sat across from him and said, "Walk me through it from the beginning." He did. She listened with her hands folded and her expression neutral in the way that meant she was being very careful. When he finished, she said, "You withheld information from me during a routine check-in." "Yes," Reed said. "Why?" "Because I thought if I reported it, the egg would be sealed again, and it would die." Issel was quiet for a while. "You may have been right," she said at last. "That does not mean what you did was within your authorization." "I know." She looked at him for a moment longer. "What do you need from me?" "The labor treaty has a preservation clause," Reed said. "Section 14, paragraph 3. It says that any worker who takes emergency action to prevent the loss of a biological specimen of value to either party is shielded from termination pending a formal review." He had looked it up. He had looked it up the same night he first found the vault. The egg was a biological specimen under conclave jurisdiction, and my emergency action preserved it. "I'd like you to say that to the conclave, clearly and precisely, before Drev defines the terms of this situation for them." Issel looked at him for a long moment. "You have 7 years of clean work here," she said. "I know. And you spent it on a dragon egg." "Yes." She stood up. "I will be back in the morning," she said, and left. She was back at dawn. She went into the conclave session, and Reed sat in his quarters and waited. He was good at waiting. It was part of the job. You made the repair, and then you waited to see if the system held. 2 hours later, Sorath came to his door. "The session is concluded," she said. Reed stood and Drev's position was that you violated conclave authority and should be expelled from the facility. He argued that the hatchling is an unclassified specimen and should be placed in formal containment pending review. She paused. Director Issel cited the treaty preservation clause, the conclave's own biological integrity statutes, and the maintenance log showing the field's decline rate. She demonstrated that without your intervention, the specimen would have been lost entirely, which would itself have constituted a violation of conclave preservation law. She was precise, Reed said. She was immovable, Sorath said, in the way that water is immovable. She did not argue loudly. She simply had the exact right words in the exact right order. Something in Sorath's expression shifted, not quite admiration, but something close to it. The conclave ruled that the matter requires further study. The hatchling is not to be harmed. Your status at this facility is suspended pending a review panel. You are not expelled. Reed breathed out slowly. Drev filed a formal objection, Sorath said. He will continue to do so. That is his right. She looked at Reed steadily. You should know that Drev arrived this morning. He has requested permission to address the review panel. He has information about the egg's origin that the conclave has not heard before. She paused. He says he has been waiting 20 years for this day. He seemed, if I am being honest, pleased. Reed thought about the short message Drev had sent him. Patience has finally run out. What is the hatchling? Reed said. Sorath was quiet for a moment. Drev will explain it better, but the word I told you, convergence, it is not a biological term. It is older than that. There are scholars in the Conclave who believe it describes something that was predicted a very long time ago, something the oldest records call a bridge between what was and what could be. She looked out the small window of Reed's quarters toward the creche. The elder dragon who brought the egg here 20 years ago crossed deep space alone to do it. She said the egg needed to be kept until the right hands found it. Reed looked at his hands. She did not specify, Sorath added, that those hands would be quite so frustratingly stubborn about filing maintenance reports. Reed almost laughed. It was not quite the right moment for laughing, but it was close. "What happens now?" he said. "Now," Sorath said, "we wait for the review panel. And while we wait, the hatchling needs a caretaker, because the Conclave has no protocol for raising something it cannot classify, and he has made it abundantly clear that he will not respond to anyone else with anything more than polite indifference." Reed looked at her. "He ignored 4 Conclave scholars this morning," she said. "He ate the data pad one of them left on the floor, which I do not believe was an accident." This time Reed did laugh. It was brief and quiet, but it was real. "I'll get my things," he said. 3 months had passed since the alcove door closed on Reed and opened again, and the creche had not returned to what it was before. It had become something else instead, something still finding its shape. Reed's quarters had been moved to the secondary wing on level 2, close enough to the alcove that he could hear Kale, that was the name, taken from the oldest Conclave notation Drev could find that came close to meaning convergence in standard, moving around at night. Kale did not sleep much. He explored. Reed had added a latch to the interior of the alcove door so Kale could let himself out, and most mornings Reed came to do his first check of the day to find Kale already waiting in the corridor, sitting very straight and looking down the hallway with the expression of someone who has been up for hours and has opinions about it. Drev visited every 7 days. He arrived with his old satchel full of texts and sat with Kale on the alcove floor and spoke in the oldest dragon dialect and in standard alternately, seemingly at random, and Kale listened to all of it with complete attention and then asked questions that made Drev go quiet for a while before answering. Reed sat in the corner of these sessions and did not participate much. He was learning. He understood, after a few weeks, that Drev was not teaching Kale. He was having a conversation with him, which was not the same thing and meant something Reed had not fully worked out yet. The review panel met twice and concluded nothing on either occasion. Drev's formal objections sat in the Conclave record. Sorath had responded to it with a counterfiling so thorough and carefully sourced that 2 junior wardens had reportedly spent a week trying to find a weakness in it and found none. The Conclave, as institutions often do when confronted with something genuinely new, was taking its time deciding what it thought. Director Issel sent Reed a short written message 1 month in. It said, "Your report is still pending. Do not file it until I tell you. The treaty language is working. Do not complicate it." Reed wrote back, "Understood." She did not reply, which was its own kind of reply. Kale's language acquisition was the thing that surprised everyone, though Reed was not sure why it surprised them. At 1 month, Kale was speaking in full sentences in both Dragon Tongue and Standard. At 2 months, he was reading, not slowly, not with effort, but the way you read something when you already understand the shapes and just need to confirm what the page says. At 3 months, he had read everything in Drev's satchel and had started asking Sorath for Warden records, which Sorath provided after a pause that Reed thought was less about hesitation and more about choosing which records to start with. Drev had not come back to the secondary wing since the tribunal, but Reed had seen him twice on the upper nursery floor, and both times Drev had been looking in the direction of level 2 with an expression that was harder to read than his usual cool certainty. Reed did not call it softening. He called it the beginning of a question. On a morning in the 4th month, Reed was running his routine check on the alcove's environmental system. The heat distribution had balanced out weeks ago, but he still ran the check because the check was the check, and skipping it was how things failed quietly. He was crouched at the base of the wall panel, reading the pressure balance on his scanner, when Cale came and sat beside him. Cale watched him work in silence for a while, then he said, "What are you doing?" His voice was still young, a little raspy at the edges, still finding its register, but the question was precise. Reed explained, checking the pressure balance, verifying the temperature held at the right level, making sure the system was doing what it was supposed to do so that it did not drift without anyone noticing. Cale was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you do?" he said. "Find the things that are failing quietly." Reed stopped what he was doing. He thought about it, not because it was a hard question, but because it was the right question, and the right questions deserved honest answers. He thought about the vault, the scanner reading at 61%, the 2 replaced nodes, the route through the service corridor at midnight, the tribunal, the wait. "I suppose," he said, "someone has to." Cale looked at him with those amber eyes that were already so much older than 3 months. "I think," he said carefully, the way he said most things, as if he were checking the weight of each word before he placed it, "that I was failing quietly for a long time." Reed closed his scanner. He put it back in his belt. He stood up and looked at the alcove, the warm light, the environmental readings all in green, the broken shell Cale had asked to keep in the corner in 4 pieces. "Not anymore," Reed said. The review panel ruled 6 weeks later. The ruling was not loud, and it was not simple, but it said, in the careful language of institutions acknowledging that something has changed, that the guardianship of the hatchling-designated Cale would be held jointly by maintenance technician Reed Calloway and Warden Sorath of the Goldspire Creche, pending no further violations of facility protocol. The arrangement had no precedent in Conclave history. The clerks who filed it reportedly had to create a new document category for it. Drev read the ruling and said it was the first treaty written between a hatchling and a species that had no business being in the same building. He said it with great satisfaction. Drev filed a formal objection. This was expected. He would file more. Reed had already decided that Drev's objections were the Conclave's way of saying we are still watching, which was fine. Being watched was something Reed knew how to work with. He had been working with it for 7 years. The morning after the ruling came through, Reed did his routine check of the alcove system before his shift. Cale was waiting in the corridor as usual, sitting very straight, watching the hallway. He looked at Reed when Reed came out. Reed looked back. Cale said nothing. Reed said nothing. They walked together toward the upper levels, past the maintenance ladders and the old stone walls and the warmth rising from the nursery floors, and the creche went on around them, enormous and ancient, and in one small wing on one small level, very quietly different than it had been before. Reed had not set out to change anything. He had set out to fix a failing system because that was the job. The job, it turned out, had been larger than the maintenance log suggested. It usually was.